The ballroom at the Plaza Hotel was perfect that night. Every crystal on the chandelier caught the light just right. Every white rose arrangement stood exactly where it was supposed to. 200 guests in designer gowns and tailored suits moved through the grand ballroom like they belonged there. Because they did. This was their world. Polished, powerful, untouchable. At the center of it all stood Preston Hart. He was wearing a Brioni tuxedo, the one Serena had picked out for him 2 Christmases ago. His silver cufflinks caught the light every time he lifted his champagne glass. He was laughing. Loud. Comfortable. The kind of laugh a man makes when he believes he has already won. And standing next to him, close enough to touch his arm, close enough to make it obvious, was Lydia Voss. She wore a red gown, backless, striking. A thin diamond necklace sat at her throat. She smiled at every person who approached, the kind of smile Serena had seen 100 times across a conference table. Calculated, practiced, hungry. 3 weeks earlier, Preston had handed Serena a document. He called it a mutual restructuring agreement. His lawyer, not hers, had drafted every single line. It stripped her of her voting shares. It froze her access to the joint accounts. It quietly erased her name from the company she had helped build from nothing, from late nights in a rented office in Midtown, from years of calls she took while Owen was still sleeping in the next room. She had read every word of that document alone, sitting at the kitchen table in their Brooklyn apartment, a cold cup of coffee beside her Kindle. She did not cry. Not then. She signed nothing. But tonight, her name was not on the guest list. The front desk had been instructed. The side entrance had been covered. Preston had thought of everything. What he had not thought of was the black town car parked quietly on 59th Street, and the woman sitting inside it, hand steady, eyes clear, waiting for exactly the right moment to walk through that door. Inside that envelope on her lap was something Preston had spent 3 years trying to make disappear. And tonight, in front of every person who mattered, it was about to surface. Her name was Serena Caldwell, 35 years old, sharp mind, quiet voice, the kind of woman who could walk into a boardroom full of men twice her age and leave with everything she came for, without raising her voice once. She grew up in New Haven, Connecticut, and the only daughter of a civil rights attorney who taught her 2 things before she turned 18. First, read every contract before you sign it. Second, when someone underestimates you, let them. It is the most powerful advantage you will ever have. She graduated top of her class from Columbia Law. She did not celebrate. She went straight to work. At 28, she co-founded Caldwell and Hart with Preston, a man she believed in completely, a man she had loved with everything she had. Together, they built an investment firm from a rented 2-desk office in Midtown into a company managing over $400 million in assets. Her name was on the founding documents. Her strategy was in every major deal. Her instincts had pulled the firm back from the edge twice when Preston's risk appetite nearly destroyed everything. But somewhere between the first million and the 400 million, Preston stopped seeing her as a partner. He started seeing her as an obstacle. When Owen was born 9 years ago, Serena took 4 months off. Preston used those 4 months to quietly shift the internal power structure. New titles, new reporting lines, new signatures on documents that should have required hers. By the time she returned, the architecture of the company had changed, and no one had told her. She noticed. She said nothing. She watched. For 6 years, she kept the company moving while Preston took the credit at every gala, every press interview, every handshake with a Wall Street partner. She sat beside him, dressed well, smiled appropriately, and went home to put Owen to bed alone most nights, because Preston was always still at the office. She knew what that meant long before she had proof. The proof came 8 months ago. a forwarded email, an accidental reply. Lydia Voss's name in a hotel reservation she was never meant to see. Serena did not confront Preston that night. She opened her MacBook Air, made a list, and started making calls. What none of them knew, not Preston, not Lydia, not a single member of that 12-person board, was that one of those calls had gone to a man named Elliot Brannigan. And Elliot had been waiting for exactly this moment for 3 years. The Plaza Hotel on Fifth Avenue did not simply host events, it presided over them. Built in 1907, its white limestone facade had watched over the corner of Fifth Avenue and Central Park South for more than a century. Presidents had slept inside its walls. Deals worth billions had been sealed in its private dining rooms. Marriages had begun and ended in its suites. It was not just a building. It was a witness to power. Who had it? Who lost it? And who walked in from the cold to take it back? Tonight, the grand ballroom on the second floor had been reserved entirely for the Caldwell and Hart annual charity gala. The room could hold 300. Tonight, it held 212. Every seat mattered. Every invitation had been issued deliberately. Preston had personally reviewed the guest list with his assistant 3 times. He had removed 4 names. Serena's was the first. Inside, the atmosphere was everything the invitation had promised. Round tables draped in ivory linen, centerpieces of white peonies, and eucalyptus in tall glass vases. A string quartet near the east wall had given way to a jazz trio as the evening deepened. Waitstaff in black moved silently between guests, carrying trays of champagne in crystal flutes that caught the chandelier light like scattered stars. The men wore tuxedos. The women wore gowns in deep jewel tones, navy, emerald, burgundy. There was the quiet, specific smell of old money in that room. Chanel No. 5. Aged cognac. Fresh flowers that cost more per arrangement than most people's weekly grocery bill. Preston stood near the head table, working the room the way he always did. A firm handshake here, a low laugh there. His Brioni tuxedo fit him perfectly. Now his silver cufflinks caught the light. He had the easy confidence of a man who believed the night was already his. Lydia stood close, not beside him like a colleague, but beside him like a statement. Her red gown left no ambiguity. The diamond necklace at her throat was new. 3 board members had already glanced at her with the particular expression of people doing quiet math, calculating what this meant, what had changed, what they had missed. No one mentioned Serena, not out loud. But across the room, near the window that looked out over Central Park, one man stood slightly apart from the crowd. He held a glass of sparkling water, not champagne. He wore a dark navy suit, no tie. He checked his watch once, a simple longines, nothing flashy, and then looked toward the entrance. He was not nervous. No, he looked like a man who knew exactly what was about to walk through that door, and had spent 3 years making sure it would. Preston Hart had not always been this man. There was a version of him Serena had loved completely. Younger, hungrier, the kind of man who worked until 2 in the morning and still brought her coffee at her desk without being asked. The kind of man who said her name with pride in rooms full of people who mattered. That man had existed. She had not imagined him. But money changes the architecture of a person slowly, the way water reshapes stone. So gradually you do not notice until the shape is entirely different, and there is no going back. Preston grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, in a family that had the appearance of wealth without the substance of it. Good address, bad finances. A father who knew everyone at the country club and quietly borrowed from 3 of them. Preston had learned early that perception was everything. What people believed about you was more valuable than what was actually true. He was intelligent, genuinely so. That had never been the lie. He could read a room faster than anyone Serena had ever known. He understood leverage, financial, social, personal. He knew which relationships to cultivate and which to discard. He had charm that felt real because, for a long time, it was. But charm without character is just a performance, and performances eventually end. When Caldwell and Hart crossed $200 million in managed assets, something shifted in Preston. He stopped talking about "we" in interviews. He started saying, "I built." He hired a publicist, and he attended events without Serena when it was convenient. He began to believe the version of the story he was telling the press, the self-made man, the visionary, the founder. He had quietly erased her from the narrative before he erased her from the company. Lydia Voss had arrived 18 months ago as a PR hire. Serena had interviewed her personally. She had liked her. Sharp, well-prepared, ambitious in the way young women in competitive industries needed to be to survive. She had advocated for her salary. She had mentored her in the first 3 months. The betrayal, when it came, did not arrive with drama. It arrived with a hotel keycard receipt in a jacket pocket. A perfume that was not Serena's on a shirt that came home too late. Small things, the kind a busy mother might miss. Serena had not missed them. What Serena had not yet discovered was the second layer, that Lydia had not only taken her husband, but had spent 6 months quietly feeding confidential client strategy documents directly to Preston's personal server, documents that were about to be used to force Serena out permanently before she could fight back. It began at 8:47 in the evening. Serena knew the exact time because she was still sitting in the back of the town car on 59th Street when her phone showed a notification from a financial news alert she had set up 3 weeks earlier, one specifically tied to Caldwell and Hart's public communications account. The headline read, "Caldwell and Hart announces leadership transition. Co-founder Serena Caldwell steps down. Preston Hart assumes full executive control." The press release had gone live while the gala was still in progress. He had not waited. He had not even given her the evening. Inside the grand ballroom, Preston had moved to the small elevated platform near the center of the room. The jazz trio had stopped playing. A publicist, not Lydia, a different one, handed him a cordless microphone. The room quieted with the particular attention that powerful people give when someone more powerful than them begins to speak. Preston straightened his jacket. He smiled at the crowd. He thanked the charity partners. He acknowledged the board members by name. He said the word vision 4 times in 90 seconds. He talked about the future of Caldwell and Hart with the ease of a man describing something that already belonged entirely to him. And then he said her name. As many of you may have seen in tonight's announcement, Serena has chosen to step back from her executive role to focus on her personal priorities. We're grateful for her early contributions. We wish her well. Early contributions, $400 million in managed assets, 11 years, 2 near collapses she had personally pulled the company back from, her name on the founding document, her strategy in every major account, early contributions. Across the room, a Bloomberg journalist typed quickly on her phone. 2 board members exchanged a glance. One of Preston's Chicago partners raised his glass slightly in a private toast to no one in particular. Lydia stood at the edge of the platform. She did not smile too widely. She had been coached well, but her hand rested lightly on the back of Preston's chair, a small gesture, completely deliberate, that every woman in that room understood immediately. Back in the town car, Serena read the press release a second time. Her hands did not shake. She folded her phone face down on the seat beside her. She looked out the window at the lights of Central Park, the trees lit from below, the skyline above them, the city moving the way it always moved, indifferent and magnificent. Then she picked up the envelope from her lap, looked at Elliot sitting beside her, and said 4 words so quietly he almost missed them. "It's time. Let's go." She had not planned to cry. She had been so careful. 8 months of careful. 8 months of lists and calls and quiet mornings when Owen was at school, and she sat at the kitchen table in their Brooklyn apartment, going through documents, cross-referencing dates, building a case brick by brick while the coffee went cold beside her. She had not cried when she found the hotel receipt. She had not cried when her access to the joint operating account was reduced to view only without explanation. She had not cried when she opened the restructuring agreement and saw what Preston had built around her, quietly, patiently, the way you build a wall around something you intend to bury. But sitting in that town car on 59th Street, reading the words, "early contributions," on a phone screen, while 200 people inside the plaza raised their glasses to a future that had been built on her erasure, something came loose. It was not a loud cry. It was the quiet kind, the kind that comes from deep down, from a place that has been holding on for too long. Her shoulders dropped first. Then her breath changed. She pressed 2 fingers against her mouth and looked out the window and let it move through her for exactly 90 seconds. Elliot did not say anything. He did not hand her a tissue or tell her it was going to be okay. He had known her long enough to understand that she did not need comfort right now. She needed space to feel it, and then set it down. After 90 seconds, she straightened. She reached into her bag, a simple black clutch, nothing designer, nothing that announced itself, and she took out a small photograph. Owen, 9 years old, gap-toothed smile, wearing a Yankees cap 2 sizes too big, the one he refused to stop wearing despite Serena's gentle protests. He was laughing in the photo, full and unself-conscious, the kind of laugh children have before the world teaches them to hold back. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she placed it carefully back in the clutch. She looked at Elliot. He was already watching her, not with pity, with something steadier than that. Something that looked like absolute, unconditional faith. She reached up and adjusted the simple pearl earrings at her ears, a gift from her father the day she passed the bar. Her armor had never been diamonds. But what Elliot had not yet told her, what he had been waiting for the right moment to say, was that the file he carried tonight contained not just evidence of fraud, but a second document that would stop Preston Hart from ever touching Owen's future again. Elliot Brannigan had known Serena Caldwell for 12 years. He had met her when she was 23, a third-year law student at Columbia, who had shown up at her father's firm on a Tuesday afternoon to drop off documents and ended up staying 4 hours because she had found an error in a contract no one else had caught. Her father had laughed. Elliot had not. He had looked at her across that conference table and thought quietly that she was going to be formidable. He had been right. He had watched her build Caldwell and Hart from the outside, close enough to see the details, far enough to stay objective. He had watched Preston take credit in rooms she had built. He had stayed quiet when she asked him to, because she was not ready, and he understood that. He had stayed ready when the time came, because that was what she needed from him. 3 years ago, a source inside Caldwell and Hart had come to Elliot privately. The source was a junior accountant named Daniel Reyes, 26 years old, who had noticed irregularities in a series of internal transfers, money moving between Preston's personal LLC and the firm's operating account, in a pattern that did not match any authorized transaction record. Daniel had been too afraid to go to the board. He had gone to Elliot instead, because Elliot's name was still on the original legal registration documents for Caldwell and Hart as an independent counsel. Elliot had spent 11 months building the file. He had 47 minutes of recorded conversation, legally obtained in a 2-party consent state through a source who had been present in the room. He had transaction records showing $2.3 million moved through channels that bypassed board authorization. He had email correspondence between Preston and Lydia discussing the timeline for Serena's removal 14 months before Preston had served her the restructuring agreement. 14 months. They had planned it while she was sitting at dinner with them, while she was covering for Lydia in client meetings, while she was reading Owen bedtime stories down the hall from a man who was already building the architecture of her erasure. Now, in the town car, Elliot opened his briefcase and laid out 3 documents on the seat between them. He did not dramatize it. He simply said, "The board chairman, Richard Cho, is inside that room. He does not know any of this yet. He needs to see it before Preston speaks again." Serena looked at the documents for a long moment. Then she looked up at Elliot and said, "There's something else in there, isn't there?" It was not a question, and the way Elliot's jaw tightened told her she was right. What he was about to show her would not just save the company. It would protect Owen in a way no court order ever could. She stepped out of the town car at 9:14 p.m. The air on 59th Street was cold and clean, the way Manhattan air gets in late October when the first edge of winter begins to mean it. Light snow had started to fall, not the heavy kind, just the thin, early kind that drifts more than it falls, like catching the streetlight and dissolving before it touches the ground. Serena stood on the sidewalk for exactly 3 seconds. She was not wearing red. She was not wearing anything that demanded attention the way Lydia's gown had demanded it. She wore a fitted black dress. Simple, structured, the kind of dress that does not try to say anything because it does not need to. A single strand of pearls. The earrings her father had given her. Low heels because she had learned years ago that you do not need height when you have ground. Elliot stepped out beside her. He straightened his jacket, tucked the briefcase under his arm, and stood slightly behind her left shoulder. Present, solid, exactly where she needed him to be without having to ask. She did not look in a mirror. She did not check her reflection in the darkened car window, and she had made peace with herself before she got dressed that evening, in the bathroom of her Brooklyn apartment, while Owen was being watched by her neighbor, Mrs. Garland, who had hugged Serena at the door and said simply, "Go get what's yours." She walked toward the side entrance of the plaza, not the main entrance, not the grand steps under the canopy where guests arrived with their photographs taken and their names checked. The side entrance, the one she had used dozens of times over the years, attending board pre-dinners, the one she knew was monitored by a security guard named Frank, who had worked the building for 9 years and who had always greeted her by name. Frank was at the door. He saw her coming. He looked at the clipboard in his hand. He looked back at her. Then he stepped aside and held the door open without a word, and she walked through. The hallway inside smelled of old wood and fresh flowers. The sound of the jazz trio drifted from the ballroom ahead. Voices, crystal, the low, polished hum of wealth at rest. She walked without hurrying. Her heels were quiet on the marble floor. Elliot matched her pace behind her. They did not speak. At the entrance to the grand ballroom, a young hostess stepped forward to intercept her. Clipboard raised, practiced smile in place, and then stopped completely when she saw the look in Serena Caldwell's eyes. It was not anger. It was something far more dangerous than anger. It was certainty. The room did not stop all at once. It stopped in waves. First the guests nearest the entrance, a couple from the Chicago office, a board member's wife, and a Bloomberg journalist who had been nursing the same glass of champagne for 40 minutes. They saw her first. The conversation at their table dropped. Then the table beside them noticed the change in attention. Then the next. The wave moved inward toward the center of the room, like a slow tide, quiet and inevitable. Preston was mid-sentence. He was at the head table, leaning toward Richard Cho, the board chairman, 61 years old, silver-haired, the kind of man who had seen everything and therefore trusted nothing quickly. Preston was explaining something with the confident ease of a man wrapping up a deal he believed was already done. He did not see her at first. Lydia did. Lydia's glass stopped halfway to her mouth. Her eyes found Serena across the room, and something moved across her face. Not guilt, not yet, but the first cold recognition that the evening had just changed shape. Her hand reached for Preston's arm. He turned. He went still. Serena walked to the center of the room, not to the platform, not to Preston. She walked to Richard Cho's table, and she set the envelope down in front of him, open, the first document facing up. The transaction records, clean and specific. $2.3 million. Dates and account numbers aligned in a column that told a story no one in that room could misread. She did not raise her voice. She said, "Richard, before tonight's announcements become official record, you need to see this. Your counsel should see it too. There is a second document behind the first one. It concerns board authorization violations going back 22 months. Richard Cho looked at her. He looked at the document. He did not reach for it immediately. He was a careful man, a measured man. But his eyes moved across the first page, and she saw the exact moment he understood what he was reading. Preston was on his feet. "Serena." His voice was controlled but tight at the edges, the voice of a man who had prepared for resistance, but not for this. Not for her walking in this calm, not for documents already in the chairman's hands before he could intercept them. Elliot stepped forward from behind her left shoulder. "Mr. Hart." His voice was level, professional. "I'm here as Ms. Caldwell's legal counsel. I'd strongly recommend you sit down before you say anything further." In the back of the room, the Bloomberg journalist had her phone out, and the 47-minute audio file already queued, and was about to play through a small speaker, just loud enough for the 3 board members sitting at the nearest table to hear every word Preston Hart had said 14 months ago when he thought no one was recording. The audio played for 4 minutes and 12 seconds before Richard Cho raised his hand and asked for it to stop. He did not need to hear all 47 minutes. No one in that room did. 4 minutes and 12 seconds was enough to hear Preston's voice. Unmistakable, unhurried, recorded in a conference room 14 months ago, laying out the plan, the restructuring agreement, the share transfer mechanism, the press release timing, and the line that settled over the grand ballroom like something cold and permanent. She'll be out before she realizes what's happened. By the time she lawyers up, it'll already be done. The room was completely silent. Not the polite silence of a crowd waiting for a speaker. The deep, specific silence of 200 people recalibrating everything they thought they knew about the man standing at the head table. Preston said nothing. His face had gone the color of old paper. Lydia had already stepped away from his side. A small but irreversible movement. The instinct of someone calculating distance from a fire that was now out of control. Richard Cho removed his glasses. He looked at the document in front of him for a long moment. Then he looked at the other board members at his table. 4 of them, all present, all watching him. He did not need to call a formal session. The language of their founding charter gave the chairman emergency authority to suspend executive privileges pending a fraud investigation. He used it. He said, quietly but clearly, "Preston, your access to company systems and accounts is suspended effective immediately pending board review. I'll need your security credentials before you leave tonight." Preston looked at Serena. She looked back at him. She did not say anything. There was nothing left that needed to be said. 3 weeks later, the board voted 11-1 to formally remove Preston Hart as CEO of Caldwell and Hart. The one dissenting vote was Preston's own proxy, which was subsequently invalidated due to the conflict of interest provisions in the founding charter. The same founding charter Serena had co-signed, the same charter Elliot had preserved in his Park Avenue office for 11 years. Lydia Voss resigned the following morning, By the end of the month, her name had been removed from every Caldwell and Hart communication. The confidential documents she had transferred to Preston's personal server were recovered. 3 clients, upon learning what had happened, personally called Serena to reaffirm their accounts. The civil case was settled 7 months later. Serena recovered her full founding equity, her voting rights, and a financial settlement that her attorney, Elliot, called appropriate. She called it enough. The custody arrangement, renegotiated through a family court process that took 4 months, gave Serena primary custody of Owen, with structured visitation for Preston. Owen, to his credit, handled it with the quiet resilience of a child who had always understood more than the adults around him realized. On the morning the new arrangement was finalized, he sat down next to Serena at the kitchen table, poured himself a glass of orange juice, and said, "Mom, are you okay now?" She told him yes. For the first time in a long time, she meant it completely. She returned to Caldwell and Hart as co-chief executive officer in the spring. She did not make a large announcement. She did not hold a press conference. She walked into the office on a Tuesday morning with a cup of Starbucks coffee and sat down at her desk and opened her MacBook Air and went back to work. The company performed better that year than it had in any previous year on record. Some people in the industry attributed it to market conditions. People who knew Serena knew better. As for Elliot Brannigan, he did not say anything dramatic. He was not that kind of man. On a Saturday morning in early April, 3 months after the board vote, he showed up at the Brooklyn apartment with 2 cups of coffee and a question so straightforward it made Serena laugh. A real laugh, the full kind, the kind she had not heard from herself in a long time. He asked if she wanted to take Owen to the farmer's market. She said yes. Owen, already in his Yankees cap, was at the door before she finished the word. It did not begin the way love stories and movies begin, with grand gestures and perfect lighting and a speech that says everything in exactly the right order. It began the way real things begin, quietly, with coffee, with a child running ahead on a Brooklyn sidewalk on a warm spring morning, with 2 people who had known each other long enough to understand that this, right here, ordinary and steady and real, was worth more than anything either of them had lost. There is something they don't tell you about women who survive betrayal. They don't come back the same. They come back clearer. They come back knowing precisely what they are worth, what they will accept, and what they will never again allow. They come back with a stillness in them that the people who underestimated them will never fully understand. Serena Caldwell walked into the Plaza Hotel on a Friday night in October with nothing but the truth and the courage to place it in the right hands at the right moment. She walked out with everything that had always been hers. A silent woman is not a defeated woman. She is a woman who is choosing her moment. And when that moment comes, she does not need to raise her voice. The world hears her anyway. So that's the end of our story. And if you're still here with me right now, I see you. I really do. Because if something kept you watching all the way to this moment, then something in Serena's story touched a part of you that you maybe don't talk about out loud. Maybe you've been in a room where your name was spoken like it didn't matter anymore. Maybe someone you trusted completely used that trust against you. Maybe you've been quietly holding things together while the world assumed you had already fallen apart. Serena didn't win because she was louder. She didn't win because she was perfect. She won because she refused to let pain turn her into someone she wasn't. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that you have power over your mind, not outside events. And that is where true strength lives. Not in the revenge, not in the moment everyone finally sees the truth, but in the quiet decision, made alone, to keep going anyway. That stillness Serena had in that town car, that is not weakness. That is a woman who knows exactly who she is. If this story meant something to you today, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a like if Serena's strength spoke to you. And if you're new here, subscribe and stay. Because every week we tell stories about real strength, real pain, and real comebacks. You showed up today. That already means something. So a note from our channel. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and storytelling purposes only. All characters, names, events, locations, and situations portrayed in this content, including Serena Caldwell, Preston Hart, Lydia Voss, Elliot Brannigan, and all related details, are entirely fictional and created by our writing team. Any resemblance to real persons, living or deceased, or actual events is purely coincidental and unintentional. The Plaza Hotel, Fifth Avenue, Manhattan, Brooklyn, and other real locations are referenced solely as narrative backdrop to create an authentic storytelling atmosphere. Their inclusion does not imply any association with, endorsement, by, or connection to any real individuals or organizations associated with those locations. This channel is dedicated to producing original dramatic fiction designed to entertain, inspire emotional reflection, and deliver meaningful life messages to our audience. We believe in honest, responsible storytelling. Every story on this channel is clearly presented as fiction. We are committed to transparency with our audience and with YouTube's content policies at all times. Thank you for watching, for trusting us, and for being part of this community.